Okay, good afternoon everyone. Fabulous to have you all here again today. We're having a bit of a look at social skills today in the workplace, which sometimes, I don't know, sounds like a bit of a very soft skill to work on, the notion of how we can get people to actually behave themselves in the workplace or demonstrate a level of social skill that might make their skills accessible or perhaps even valuable to the team that you're working in. And I guess today, probably worth me unpacking to begin with why I'm running a webinar on this. It came out of conversation. I was talking with a client in a large government department the other day who shall remain nameless. And we were talking about my background as a teacher and as a school principal a little bit. And we spoke, he said to me, so how do they in schools, how do they teach social skills? Because I could sure do with a bit of that here. And I told him a little bit about how we do it in primary schools. And he said, yeah, that sounds really good. He said, you haven't met Barry. And I said, okay, tell me a bit about Barry. And I got the full rundown on what's going on with Barry and why he's a complete pain in the proverbial and why none of the education will make a difference and how we can never get a breakthrough with Barry. And so I guess I just wanted to start by declaring that this webinar is dedicated to Barry. This webinar is about how you can start to make some traction. It's not about saying that there's a magic wand here, that if we use one little bit of magic here, that Barry will all of a sudden turn around, be a fabulous corporate citizen, be a valuable and empathic team member. But it is saying that we can begin with, rather than a 180-degree turnaround, a 5-degree turnaround. So if you can imagine Barry as being like the dial on a safe, what we're trying to do is to just click it one more click to the right in the hope that that's the one that goes, yep, we can now tolerate Barry. And when we get another click, we might go towards now we can accept Barry. And when one more click further might be that now we actually really value Barry. It takes time. It takes time. And so while I hope and believe that what we're working through today in this webinar will be of genuine value to you, I am mindful that we're playing the first step in a long game here. And so what I wanted to do, I guess, first of all, is to unpack for you what the journey is that we're working towards. I'm still very firm in the belief that when we're talking about the skills behind the future of collaboration, there are two skill sets that collide, and if they don't collide and in fact combine in the workplace, we get a really positive result. And first of all, that's the people skills part of it. So we hear all the time about people who, great operator, really know their stuff, but their people skills are shocking. And that's why they can't get a promotion, or that's why they don't get transferred into a different department. And it's the absence of those people skills that are really important. And they're what we often are referring to as being the soft skills. So, we're going to do a little bit of work on them today. And then the other side of it is it's no good just being a nice person in the workplace. You've really got to be able to get your stuff done, and you've got to be able to do it with other people. What we know about the future work skills that people will need is that they will be high on collaboration, which means that very, very rarely in the future will many of the workplaces or any of the job roles in the future that require people to work entirely in isolation. There will be a collaborative, creative, problem-solving angle to the way that they're working. So we've got to have something that sits alongside those personal skills, which is just professional skill. So it's the skill of being able to know and then deploy what are the different things that work when we're at work. The good part is that when those professional and personal skills start to sort of loop on each other and start to feed each other, start to complement each other rather than clash with each other, what drops out of that? The first thing, we get three Asians, I reckon. The first one we get is genuine collaboration. So I don't want anyone to think that collaboration is just about putting people together and then they'll work well, nor do I think it's just about training individuals to be able to speak nicely to other people. It's about what happens when the people skills and the professional skills start to complement each other. So it's a machine collaboration. It's not a standalone item. So if you can get that to happen, you get great collaboration. You also get transformation. So we get people who genuinely change, who generally walk past the line in the sand, and they do it without shame. They actually start to go, you know what, I used to be like this, but now I'm not. I've learned something new and I'm like that. And that's just a wonderful a wonderful achievement, to be really honest, when people like Barry can go, you know what, I've seen the error in my ways and I've found a safe enough place to be able to go and deploy myself differently in the workplace. So you can get genuine transformation when you get that happening, which is exciting. And the other thing that you get is creation, which means that you get people who are not only doing their job, but they are finding ways to do it better. They are creating new ways that you potentially as a leader or manager couldn't actually see. I just couldn't see how this could be better. But through the fact that we're allowing those people skills and those professional skills to really mesh in a creative and artful kind of way, we actually get people who are, you know, developing new ways of doing things, and that's awesome, because that's teamwork. Teamwork is when we are better than the sum of our parts, and it's when people get together and genuinely collaborate. They not only solve problems, but they see new pathways forward. Really cool stuff. So I guess that's why we do social skills, and I find it funny that that whole conversation began with Barry, and it began with a conversation about primary schools. And I'm going to deploy one of my social skills here today by acknowledging that people next door to the Real Learners office today have decided that now is a fabulous time to begin mowing the lawn and using their whippersnipper. So I noticed, though, that they don't have too much lawn, though, so I hope that the interruption, if you can hear it, is reasonably brief. All right, let's get cracking with it. First thing I want to say to you is I acknowledge that today, in the pursuit of turning people around, of trying to get people around 180 degrees, that I'm going to have to move rather quickly through a large component of content, and that it will, to some extent, feel like drinking from a garden hose today. So I acknowledge that, and just want to know that I'm going to give you my absolute best through the work that we've got here over somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour or so. And at the end of it, I'll give you an opportunity to know how you can step a little further with that if you'd like to know more. So forgive me if I go rather quickly today, and just know that there's ways that you can step forward from here that will make a genuine difference if you decide to do so. And I guess the other thing I want to encourage you about is that any webinar today, we get more and more people who are registering for our webinars every month, which is really cool because we see new people in the attendee list every time we run a webinar. And the one thing I do want to encourage anybody who's coming along to the webinar, maybe for the first time today, is that I'd really love it if you would not leave a question unanswered. There's nothing worse than a great unanswered question at the end of a day like today. So I do want to encourage you to get involved. Ways that you can get involved include the chat or the question box, depending on which version of GoToWebinar control panel has bobbed up on your screen. So if you do have something you want to ask today, particularly I guess if it's about the content of the webinar today and how you can improve social skills in your team, make sure that you ask that question. It'd be great to be able to attach some of what I'm talking about today to a genuine context and to perhaps solve a real problem for you in real time. And also know that if you're having any tech issues today, that you can put that question in the question box, and my wonderful business manager, Chris, is online with us today and a bit of a whiz on this stuff, so she'll help you out and make sure that you can hear and see everything that you want to be hearing and seeing. So that's really important. The other thing we can do is we can unmute you. So you'll see in your dashboard there or your control panel a little hand symbol, and this is just like your old school classroom, which makes me incredibly comfortable as an old chalky. And what you can do is put your hand up. I'll be able to unmute you, and you can make a verbal contribution to the webinar as well. Very happy to do that for those who are less inclined to be asking a question in the question box. I want to really encourage you to step up and to get involved today, mainly for the reason that when you go back to work this afternoon or tomorrow or whatever the case may be for you, Barry's still there. And, you know, the things that we start to hear about and that we're frustrated by, and I want to talk really plainly about some of these today, and the annoyances that we get when social skills are absent from our workplace, that we kind of have, it has a negative emotional impact on us. And when our emotions are high, our ability to strategize is compromised. And it also has a negative emotional impact on the people in your team. And so it goes all the way down to affecting talent retention in your organisation, and goes all the way down to, you know, managing workplace stress and even things like bullying. And I'll talk about that in just a moment as well. We would love it if chill pills were real. If we could just hand out a chill pill or even take one ourselves, or maybe you'd like to overdose on chill pills, I don't know. But we would love it if they existed. They just don't. And Barry's there. They're waiting for you when you get back to work today. So if there's a question about your Barry, then I'm really happy to try and contextualise this work today in that. Okay, let's get cracking. When we talk about personal skills, and I guess the soft component of how we get collaboration to happen, the first thing we need to do is to say, how can we build some of the features, some of the feelings, some of the affect in our organisation that will feed or provide a culture where learning, improvement, performance, creation, collaboration have a better chance of happening. So it sounds an odd thing to do to say that what we want to do is first build the soft component within trust. Trust, just like social skills or any other social skill, has those two components of personal and professional. So first of all, I want to talk about the personal. And I want to give you a little game that you could play with your people. So let's pretend that we don't know each other. And so there's a couple of people whose names I don't recognise on the attendee list today. So maybe we're being truly authentic here. And I want to tell you three things about myself. Number one is that this is a wonderful shot of Victoria Falls in Africa. The bridge there connects two countries, Zimbabwe and Zambia. My wife and I went there in about 1998. And we went there because we were going to start a family. And before you start a family, we want to do a big overseas trip, because apparently the best way to start a family is to commence that with a $20,000 credit card debt. Not particularly wise. But went there, we did. We had a fabulous time. And we got to Victoria Falls here, and I was being a bit of a thrill seeker, and my wife is less of a risk taker than I. And so I was allowed to either whitewater raft on the Zambezi River, which is what you can see cascading there into the gorge, or I was allowed to bungee jump, and I chose the bungee jump. And so what we did was I jumped off the middle of that bridge there from that little hut you can see in the middle, and plummeted 330 feet towards the river below. One of the world's, they call it a natural, because it's not the supports to it don't touch the ground. They just connect the gorges. They call it the largest natural bungee jump in the world. Wonderful, wonderful experience. The second thing I want to tell you about myself is that I'm a sport. I love sport, have done ever since I was a kid. And as a kid, as a 12-year-old, I came home and saw this on the screen when I was growing up living in Frankston in Victoria. And those of you who know Frankston will know that might explain a couple of things about me. And my mate Matt and I watched the closing ceremony of the 1984 Olympic Games in LA. And then Matt convinced me to go into the backyard and to play the Olympics. And as is the wont of two 12-year-old boys from Frankston, I managed to. We played javelin first, and Matt went first, and I marked his tee on the grass. I marked his javelin landing on the grass with a golf tee, and then I had my turn, which was just fabulous. And I remember to this day even seeing the javelin just fly through the air and spin the right way. So it didn't wobble like a mad stick. It actually spun and started to curve towards the ground, and I was convinced I was going to beat Matt. This would be great. And then my 5-year-old sister ran out the back door, and she landed, and I don't know whether it was lucky or unlucky, but the javelin hit her on the foot, and 8 stitches later I was in a big pile of trouble. And then the third thing I want to share with you today is that being my sport of choice to be tragic about is cricket. I will go to cricket training this afternoon as a 45-year-old man preparing for another second 11 finals on the weekend. And growing up, I was a little bit more adept, a little bit more fit, and I was an up-and-coming fast bowler, and I wanted to get picked in the Dowling Shield. The Dowling Shield's an under-16 comp. You get to play for the big district clubs in Melbourne on the big district grounds, and you got a week off school to do it. So I was, as a 15-year-old, could not be more eager to get picked. Made my way into the South Melbourne team, and played a game that week at the Junction Oval against St Kilda Cricket Club, who had a young fella called Shane Keith Warne playing for them. Bless my mum's odd little heart, she was our scorer, managed somehow to pilfer the scorebook from that week, which I thought was an odd thing to do. But mum still has the score sheet at home at her place in Frankston from the game of cricket that as a 15-year-old I played against Shane Warne. I'm wondering if you can tell which one of those three things about me that I've shared with you in order to build a little bit of personal trust. I'm wondering if you can tell which one was the lie. do you know which one it was that I was completely, if I may speak so colloquially, bullshitting you about? If you reckon you know, just put it in the chat box. If you think I was lying about the bungee, just put number 1. If you think I was lying about my sister's foot, then put number 2. And if you think I was lying about playing cricket against Shane Warne, then put number 3. And let's see how many of you can actually tell what my competency to lie is. I'll give you a couple more seconds to put in which one you think I was lying about. Yeah, a couple of answers starting to come through now. All right, it seems that quite typically the most common answer that people think I'm lying about is number 1, which is very cruel, because that means you obviously either think I'm a wuss, or you think that perhaps I was I exceeded the weight limit. If you know me, I'm 6'5", and that's a very cruel thing for you to say. But I did. I bungee jumped off number 1. I bungee jumped off that bridge. I also got my sister in the foot, Jonathan. Thank you for having a crack at it, mate. But I got her. It was the third one about Shane Warne. I love my cricket, I really do, and I was the last kid cut from the South Melbourne cricket team. Even if I did make it that year, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to play against Warnie. He, despite the work that he's had done, is a couple of years older than me, and I would never have been able to play against him even if I did make the team. Cricket, tragic I am. Shane Warne level, I am not. Now, that seems a really silly thing to do, and you can do it incredibly quickly. Like, I can get 2 people to play what I often refer to as the 2020 version of 2 Truths and a Lie. In about 90 seconds, they can both play it by just quickly rattling off 3 things about themselves. One of them has to be a lie. What happens there is that we get a connection starting to happen. Now, I mentioned before the whole notion of workplace bullying, certainly something that will negatively impact the social skills and the people skills in your team. And we have programs that our organisations pay an extraordinary amount of money to be able to, bring in for run on a Wednesday afternoon, so that we won't have workplace bullying in our organisation or our business any longer. And it's crazy. The number 1 research and literature proven protective factor against workplace bullying is simply knowing something personal about the other people. Even better, that connection, because what it does is it establishes a connective thread between the 2 people. And even better is when we find out something that we've got in common. So if anyone on the webinar today has travelled overseas, or likes cricket, or has perhaps even maimed a younger sibling, whatever the case may be, that connection between us actually thickens every time we find something out about each other, and even better when we find out what we've got in common. That connective thread between us is the insurance against what bullying is, which is negative power-influenced interactions. So if we don't want to have workplace bullying in our organisations, then the first place to start is by building a little bit of personal trust. And to be honest, it starts with leaders who are prepared to provide and to structure for ridiculous little games like 2 Truths and a Lie to actually happen in their organisation. Now, the second part of this trust component, and this is where we talked about personal trust, but when we're talking about professional trust, what we're talking about here is a predictability that comes from knowing the way that everything is going to be handled, particularly the way that anything negative is going to be handled. We've prepared for it, we've talked about it, and we've even gone as far as getting it into policy and into procedure, the way that we're going to deal with things. Now, the thing that is most likely to erode professional trust in an organisation is when there's conflict. So when we have conflict over the way that we're working, a desired outcome, the bottom line being met or not, the degree of success to which something has been achieved, or the degree of failure. I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. Whenever conflict has the opportunity to come along, what we need is a methodology for dealing with it. Now, the methodology that's most often deployed is that we launch business CSI, which means that we start to hear one person's side of the story, we start to hear other affected people's side of the story, and we begin to make judgments and assumptions, because the past-based methodology for conflict is find out what happened, who's to blame, and then what punishment or sanction I need to hand out to that person, even if it's just in the form of negative feedback. And what happens is that people learn to play that system, and they learn to become very much bush lawyers. So they will tell you things like, you know, well, I just knew this would end up a disaster because the first day that he walked in here 5 years ago, he told me that he was better than me at my job. And so you think, wow, we're bringing up things from 5 years ago here. People are trying incredibly hard to build such a strong case against the other person that you couldn't possibly end up with the outcome being a negative result against them. So what we need to do is to get a system in place that's not just anchored in the past. And the best way to think about it is to go, the way we do conflict in our organisation is to go past, present, future. So whenever we get a professional or a personal conflict, we say, sure, what happened? The present is, what's the damage? How, and to be honest, this is the soft bit. How are people feeling? You know, what's the impact been of that? And that's the mess. That's what we need to clean up. So the future is, what's the action that we're going to take that cleans up the mess? So you could end up with the past, what's the story here? And we really don't need to go forever and ever. I always talk about how much of the past do I need. I need a gist. I don't need to go back 5 years. I need a rough idea of what's going wrong with you people. Okay, so, you know, she's been, you know, taking credit for the work that you've been doing when we've been having senior executive meetings. Okay, you don't see it that way. You see that you've shared the credit, but you feel that your contribution is not being acknowledged either. Okay, what's the present? How's this make people feel? It's making me feel undervalued. It's making me feel anxious, and it's making me feel like I might want to go and look for another job somewhere else. Okay, and what's the future then? What are we going to do about that? So what do we do first about the person that's feeling anxious? How can we make them the opposite of anxious, which might be safe? And then, you know, potentially, how can we make somebody feel valued when they're feeling undervalued? What's one action we could take? And then, if you've got someone who's looking at leaving our organisation, what do we do about that? Now, that might be that we're going to help you, to be really honest, which sounds horribly cruel, but it might also be that there's something simple that we could do that would make you feel like you wouldn't start to go raking through seek.com to see what else is out there. So very important that we speak ahead of time about that process so that when it hits the fan, when it gets emotional, we've already talked about the way that we resolve conflict in our organisation. Very important if you want people to start demonstrating appropriate social skills in your environment. Next thing I want to do is to say the number 2 thing that I want you to do if you want to get this social skill thing going well is to make sure that you work to a perceived strength with the person. This goes to the notion of strength-based language. What I mean is that by the time a person is doing something so repetitively and so destructive that you feel the need as a manager or leader that you've got to have a conversation about this. We've got to talk about it. What's happened is we've made some assumptions in our head through the list of difficulties that they've been causing, that they are a particular type of person, that they have a particular type of trait. And when we go to talk to them about that trait, they have no idea what we're talking about. So if you think about the lazy person, I quite like this picture. I've seen this kind of employee several times. Does make me wonder why he's at work at just 7:30 in the morning. But anyway, that's another story. Lazy people. If you go to talk to someone about their laziness, they have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And if you tell them that, oh, you are lazy, they'll have a negative response to that, and the conversation will be over, or it will be incredibly painful. Lazy people don't know they are lazy. They don't perceive themselves as lazy. They perceive their contribution here to be a strength and to be quite valuable. And I'm wondering if you can think in your head about the way that a lazy person sees themselves. And the most common descriptor that I hear when I'm talking to people about that is they see themselves as being laid back. So they think that they really help. They help people chill out a little bit at work. I'm just relaxed. Everything's fine. It'll get done when it gets done. And so they don't realise that the way that they're operating is having a negative impact on other people. And that's what the next step is, that once you do realise that you can help them talk about the fact that, approach them not by talking about laziness, but talk to them about their laid back nature, and just say, hey, you and I would both agree that you're a pretty laid back sort of person. Is that right? Yeah, I think it helps people chill out. And, oh yeah, that's probably fair enough. It's good that you're thinking about the way that it impacts other people. I'm wondering if you think that there could ever be a negative impact of being so laid back in the way that you do your work. And what happens there, just by taking that Socratic approach of asking questions, what happens is that they actually might often have a little awakening. Oh, okay, I guess sometimes people could think I didn't care, or I was a bit lazy maybe in the work. Yeah, I think that's possible. What do you think could be done about that? What sort of things that we could do? And it could potentially be the elimination of workplace naps that might start to change that perception about people. But if you think about all the things that we would want to talk to people about, want to talk to them about the fact that they're an incredibly arrogant person. Well, let's understand that they don't see themselves as arrogant. They see it as a strength, and they probably see it as confidence. And then we could talk to them about the way that confidence could be perceived by others, and then what we could do to reduce the negativity of that perception. Think about angry people. They don't see themselves as angry, they see themselves as forthright. And think about cruel people. They don't see themselves as being cruel. They see themselves as someone who tells it like it is, and warts and all. And if we can have them understand not that we don't value them, but that their behaviour has an impact, then we can start that process of turning the dial a little bit to swing them around to the dark side, to the good, to the into the light rather than into the dark. Now, if you do have particular social skills, positive social skills that you want to bring to your team, I want to talk to one in a minute about. I want to talk a little bit about how you could bring some social skill around accepting failure, and also around innovating and inventing in just a few minutes. When I had the conversation the other day with that colleague of mine, and they were asking me what we did in primary schools, I told them there were 3 steps, 3 basic steps to teaching a social skill. And I thought it might be useful if I just unpack them a little bit for you today. Number 1 is to be explicit and unambiguous about what that skill is, but do it in a group setting. So in your team, it's a valuable thing to say, you know what, I want to talk about this skill today, and I want to have a bit of fun with it. And then people immediately are quite comfortable with that. When you talk about it, if you call someone in for an individual meeting, then often we can get, hey, how come you want to talk to me about that? But if we do it in a group setting, what we do is we wrap some support and also some accountability around the person in the team who might be a bit of a target. So I was talking to this colleague about how in schools we would do what we call on-task behaviour, which is how we ensure that the kids are actually spending a larger proportion of time doing their work versus stuffing up the classroom. And so I said, first of all, around on-task behaviour, it would be to make it clear to the kids what on-task behaviour looks like. There were 3 steps involved in that, which is to start the job. And I would get the kids to practice it in silly voices. I would get them to, talk about the time limit, which meant they had 1 minute to start the job. And I would talk to them about the fact that they couldn't win our 3-step challenge, the phase 1, which is start the job, unless every single student in the class was completely on task by the time 1 minute ran out. So the task in this instance was, we just want you to draw a picture. I'll say, you've got 1 minute, go find your pen, the textures and the crayons and the pencils that you want, go find the paper that you need, be back at your desk and be drawing quietly within 1 minute. Got me on that, go. And so I was really explicit about what they needed to do. Now, the next bit was I gave them a safe way to do phase 2, which was stay on the job, stay on it for a longer period of time. And what I would get the students to do is just keep drawing, even though I'm going to make it tricky for you. I would give them, it was safe to do so. It wasn't real work. They weren't being graded on it. They weren't being assessed on it, but it was a safe and a fun way to kind of play with it. So I would tell the students that, you need to draw, keep drawing, no matter what. The primary task is to draw, but I'm going to distract you. I'm going to get you to stand up. I'm going to get you to draw with your opposite hand. I'm going to get you to draw with your eyes closed. I'm going to get you to draw certain things in certain colours. And they had to just make sure that no matter what, they never forgot the primary task. And then the third step was that they needed to finish the job, which was about changing their energy in order to move quickly, rapidly, work furiously to get that picture finished, perhaps over a period of 2 minutes. So I made it really clear what the expectations were in a group, and then I made it fun for them to practice it. Then what you can do is to apply it to the real world. And with adults, I would suggest that looks like a conversation around reflecting on how good we were at it, how happy we were with that social skill to be a part of who we are, and asking them to sit with a colleague and to genuinely make a public declaration of what they're going to do to get better at that skill. Now, in the adult learning environment, this is where I want to go to some of the skills that you'll need. In the adult learning environment, we talk in our training a lot about failure. And about, if I'm really honest, it was one of one of the skills that I really needed to get better at when I moved from being a school principal to being a business owner was that in schools, you try really hard to make sure that everything is perfect every single time and everything's got to work, because you get judged horribly if things go wrong. In business, you've got to understand that a whole heap of what you try is going to fail. And when you can actually understand that, then what happens is you get great levels of resilience. You get a willingness to learn from one of the most effective teachers, which is trial and error. I know that I'm pleased to see a couple of gentlemen in the attendance list today, and we males in particular need to learn from trial and error. Most of us were told multiple times as kids not to touch the stove, yet the only time that we learned was when we touched that stove. And that's not the end of it just because you made a mistake. Success is not failure. I said success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts, was what Winston Churchill said. So what's an activity that follows that 3 steps that you could bring to your teams? I'd suggest you can involve Lego. Love Lego. I think it's an awesome way for teams to have a bit of fun, and most of the little boy or the little girl in the team will come out of everybody the second you've got a pile of Lego on the table. So the activity that I used to do with these people, with teams, is that I would say, here's the Lego. Now, I used to live in the Northern Territory. I lived up in Darwin for 9 years and had a wonderful time doing so. What I would like you to do over the next 4 minutes is build me a house from this Lego that reminds me of Darwin. So forget, if you're living in southern or temperate states, forget some of the high density housing that with houses that are separated by 3 feet and a timber fence, because we need cross breezes in Darwin. So you'll need to think about some of the stilted homes. And I want to ask them to think about all the other features that might exist in a Darwin home that don't exist in a southern home. And I'll say you've got 4 minutes to build it, and I have a metric for measuring whether you have achieved this task or not. And then I pull out a mallet. I tell them, if I think this is a decent Darwin home, I will let your house live. Otherwise, I will smash it mercilessly. And they go, and they work. And it's a bit of an argy-bargy, but the house gets built. And at the end of it, and almost every single time I wander the room then and I smash some houses. And some people can handle it and go, fair enough. And I tell them exactly why I smashed their house. There wasn't enough flora and fauna there. There wasn't a swimming pool for us to cool off in. There wasn't an area for us to cook outside. I just don't think it was cyclone coded. I don't think the house was strong enough. So I'd give them plenty of feedback. And then I would tell them, you now have half the time. You have half the time to build this house, and I expect it to be better. And during the next 2 minutes, I provide additional feedback and encouragement. And at the end of the 2 minutes, almost to a team, the houses are far more Darwin-like and sturdy than during the first 4 minutes. So efficiencies are improved when we encourage failure, because we got so good at being what I call feedback hungry. And that's when organisations are really cool with being able to be bad at something to fail, and to get the feedback in order for us to be more efficient and more effective next time around. Of course, that needs to be followed up with a little bit of, now what about you? What did you do? What did you not do recently because you were worried you were going to fail? What was a piece of failure that you had recently that you didn't learn from because you were just annoyed at the fact you were failing? And people start to make those public declarations, insulated by some support and some accountability, that really helps them get somewhere. So cool little activity. And look at those 3 steps. Be explicit. We're talking about failure today. Number 2, give them something fun that they can do with it and that's non-threatening. Lego, can't get more non-threatening than Lego. And then 3 is apply it to the real world. So get them to make some real world decisions and take action with that in mind. The next one I want to talk about, the next skill you'll need, is invention. Now, I talk about invention as being almost the opposite, almost the antithesis of innovation these days. I think that for most of you, if you're in a management or a leadership role, you probably, if you went to a day on better workplace innovation and came back to tell your team that you'd been to an awesome day about innovation, now everything's going to be different, that they would probably roll their eyes, because most of us have begun to view innovation as additional work. So really important to reframe that, I think, for people. I think inventions are better. Inventions are designed to make work more simple. to make progress more accessible. And what I want to do today, let's just see if this little invention today is going to do the right thing for me. What I want to do today is just play you a very quick little video here. A guy called Scott Anthony, and Scott unpacks for us in just a couple of minutes here what disruptive innovation, what I would call invention is all about. Just watch this one for a moment.
So a disruptive innovation, what exactly is it? It's a word that gets tossed around a lot, but often misused. Now, when we think about disruptive innovation, we think about a very particular type of innovation, one that creates an entirely new market or transforms an existing one by playing the innovation game differently. We contrast disruptive innovation to sustaining innovation. Sustaining innovation is about doing it better. It's adding the fifth blade on your razor blade. It's making the picture of your TV ever clearer. It's giving you a better cell phone reception. Sustaining innovations are important. They're the way that markets change, but it's not the best way to create new growth. What a disruptive innovator does is trade off pure performance. Instead of making things much better, they make it much simpler. They make it more affordable. They make it more accessible. They make it more customizable and drive growth by playing the game in a different way. Let me give you a couple of examples. Think about how Sony and Nintendo approached the video gaming industry. Sony said, how do we make it better for our best customers? In this case, fast-fingered teenagers. So you create ever better graphics, more intense gameplay. The teenagers who've got those twitchy fingers love the PlayStation 3. Nintendo said, what about all the people in the world who don't consume any video game technology at all because it's too complicated or too expensive? Created its Wii product. So simple, so intuitive that my 2.5-year-old son has figured out how to play baseball. Now, he's not particularly good, but he knows if he goes like this, his character will swing the bat on screen. Make it simple, make it affordable, make it accessible, create a new growth business. Think about what Google has done in the advertising world. Before Google, a company like Insight wouldn't have the ability to advertise because it simply would have been too expensive. Google makes it so simple and so affordable that many, many small businesses can advertise, turning Google into the powerhouse it is today. Finally, think about Minute Clinic, whose nurse practitioner-based kiosks are popping up in retail locations around the country. In these kiosks, a nurse practitioner can diagnose one of 20 everyday conditions, things like strep throat. They can do that in less than 15 minutes. Their tagline, you're sick, we're quick. They can't treat every condition, but if you've got one of those 20 conditions, it's very quick, it's very simple, you get your prescription on the spot. Disrupting the healthcare industry not by doing it better along traditional dimensions, but by doing it differently. We've seen this pattern now play out in more than 70 different industries. And again, we see those companies that can unleash the power of disruptive innovation as being those that have the greatest chance of creating blockbuster growth businesses.
Clever stuff from Scott there. What I really love about this whole concept of invention or disruptive innovation rather than your standard innovation or sustaining innovations as Scott would call them is this whole notion of instead of doing it better, could we do it differently? And just posing that question to your people about even the most benign or operational factors within your organisation can have them start to get on a roll, and where eventually they're actually creating new and potentially those blockbuster business opportunities for you as well. And I guess the next skill that I wanted to have a bit of a look on, the final skill I wanted to have a bit of a look on was this notion of reflection. And most of us say that we would like to be reflective leaders. Most of us say that we would like our teams to be full of reflective people. But I do think that far too many people reflect loosely. And what I mean by that is that for me, when I run, say, a day of training with a business, I walk out to the car and I might say, I'm going to reflect. I'm going to get out to my car and I have a 10-second rule, which is that I must reflect before I'm allowed to turn the ignition in the car. And which is all well and good, because what I could do if I was being loose about it was sit there and go, well, you know what? yeah, I was pretty good. And then I drive off. And of course, that reflection is pointless. Equally pointless would be to say I suck. Again, doesn't lead to any sort of action or change in any way. The only way that you can actually get change is to reflect upon something. So the gag I often make is that, if you're going to, put on makeup or shave or do your hair in the morning, you will reflect upon a mirror, because to do it upon nothing will get you a bad result. So you need that mirror. You need to be able to hold up something in front of yourself to be able to genuinely tell what it is that needs to be done. I had a unity balance model when I was the principal of a brand new primary school. I told them that what we were going to do, my 3 spheres that you can see there in that model, were anecdote. We were going to change the stories that people told about our school. Evidence, we were always going to be able to say that what we were doing matters, and we were able to prove that we were getting better at it. And then the last one was intuition, which means we were going to take current knowledge and use it to challenge convention and tradition. And being able to tick off on those 3 things and get myself into that little dark section in the middle of that unity balance model meant that I could lead consistently and I could make decisions consistently. Hugely important. But that was for unity balance, because when you open a new school, you're looking to get everybody on the same page. Your context is likely to be incredibly different to that. You're in a business or an organisation, and you could be established as well, which means you might be saying, okay, how could I take, for instance, a foundational model where I need to start with something really important, get it in place, make sure that the foundations of that are incredibly strong, and I don't move on to the next step until I know that it's strong enough to stay the distance and I don't need to attend to it again. And only then, when I move on from that middle phase of the foundation model, can I get to the peak? Can I get to the pinnacle where I've got what I'm really looking for? Leverage models are really interesting. That's where you might be in a middle management position, and you've got to think about not only how the little cogs, if you want to change something, if you're a mid-sized cog, you've got to think about how the how the little cogs are going to turn if you change, so that they don't crunch the machine to a standstill. But you've also got a big cog to think about. And I know that myself as a leader, I'm big on people coming to me with a problem and a solution. So what I'd like them to do is to make it easy for me to say yes. So I want to encourage you to think about who are the people above you in your organisation that you need support from, and how is it that you could manipulate them to give you an easy yes to what it is that you're trying to do. Hierarchy models are really interesting. They get a bit of a bum rap, hierarchy models, because people think they're about power. The truth is, though, that many organisations have people running around doing their own thing. There's no job clarity. Hierarchy models can be incredibly useful if there isn't job clarity in your organisation, and we just need to make it clear whose responsibility is what. And so they can be really useful. And I don't want to, I guess today, my belief is that in business, there is too much model theft and too little model design. Model design is good for context. Model theft is great for being lazy. So what I want to encourage you to do is just think for a moment about those 8 different model types. And I'm wondering for you which one would jump off the page at you a little bit, which is one that go, actually, that's the one that I think I'd like to start work on. And start work. Start work. I don't mean to be the educator today that gives you a little homework, but I would really love it if you're here today and you're going to download the handouts from today, the slides from today, that this is the slide that you pay the most attention to. If you want to be a consistent decision maker in your work, having a mirror, having a model that you hold up against your performance is about the only way to do it. And designing it is the most effective, although least lazy, way to get around that. Now, what do you get? I guess I'm presenting a whole heap of work to you today and a whole heap of possibilities. And I spoke earlier in the webinar about what you can get in terms of collaboration, in terms of transformation, and in terms of creation. And I think that they're things that exist mainly for your team members. I think that what you get out of it is a wonderful sense of cohesion. And I'd like to start to conclude today's webinar by having a little fun, albeit less than politically correctly, around what sort of cohesion and problem solving I'm talking about with your people.
You got a light, mate?
Yeah, obviously.
Sorry, I finished. It's all right, I'll take care of that. I finished. Me too.
And when it comes to today's webinar, I'm just about finished too. So a couple of things to finish off. Number one, please remember that I would really love today to be of benefit to you straight away. So you'll see in the handout section of your control panel that you've got the chance to download the slide deck from today. I would really love to reward you and thank you for your giving up 45 minutes or an hour or so of your time today to learn a little more about this important work. And if you think, like I said at the start today, I know that I went really quickly, and if you think that you would like to take a step further and have a conversation about how we can bring some of that concept to your team, just use that chat box again. I know we had everybody sort of jumping in at the start guessing about what I'd done to my sister's foot or not. If you think you'd be interested in getting some workshops happening or some presentations or some training in your business to be able to make this sort of work become a reality, not just for you, but for everybody, then just pop that word in there. We'll follow up with you, get in touch and see what we can do for you. And hey, this webinar goes to the notion of the next webinar that we'll run in April, which is about higher order thinking. And that's about how you can get people, once they're collaborating better, once you've got the people skills and the professional conduct under control in your team, it's about how we then elevate, how we go up to not just having people receive education, not just how we can have people nod along and comply with the things that we're trying to do, but how we can actually get them to do those higher order verbs that I like to say are things like how we can get them to create, how we can get them to critique, how we can get them to evaluate, assess, how we can get them to rank, how we can get them to recognise rather than to receive, remember, and perhaps regurgitate. So I think this is going to be a webinar that if you've come along today and enjoyed it, that one you'll also really enjoy. We'll send you a link to be able to register for that one after we get this webinar done. But hey, look, thank you so much for everyone for coming along. If you'd like to talk to me more, then I'm happy to talk. Always like a yarn. I hope that that's become evident today as well. And if you'd like to talk further, plenty of details there about how we can get in touch. Thank you so much for coming along. We'll see you next time.